Coming up in this podcast, I have one of the greatest economic minds in modern history. He has groundbreaking evidence showing the economic impact illegal migration has to an economy. To continue to have these amazing conversations with these amazing people, I do need you all to subscribe. I've seen that the vast majority of you that listen to my podcast don't actually subscribe. So please do subscribe so I can continue to have these conversations that very few people are prepared to have. Subscribe now and enjoy the podcast. Hi, Edward. Amazing to have you on the show today. For those who are not aware of everything that you've done and all your credentials, it'd be great to get a general intro into yourself and your career.
Yeah, sure. I'm a Wall Street executive. Worked at a bunch of different renowned institutions. HSBC Bank in the early '90s as an institutional fixed income salesperson. Went back to business school. Then went on to Donaldson, Lufkin and Jenrette, where I was an electric utility analyst, working for a senior analyst during the dot-com boom. So I saw a lot of the shenanigans going on then. Left DLJ in 2000 and went to Independence Investments, which was a firm up in Boston, managing an S&P portfolio for pension funds. I was a tech analyst. And then I went to BlackRock to become a portfolio manager in 2002, where we grew an existing business from 2 billion to 14 billion over 10 years. And so I have a lot of experience in the financial asset markets, both fixed income and equities. I recently became known for my book, Cause Unknown, The Epidemic of Sudden Death in 21 and 22. We just applied our Wall Street expertise to the phenomenon of excess deaths that occurred during COVID and after the vaccines. And we came to the conclusion that the vaccines were probably useless and caused a lot of harm. And then my partner, Carlos Allegri, and we have a firm called Finance Technologies, which is a macroeconomic alternative investment firm. We're trying to raise money for a hedge fund. And in the meantime, we're doing economic analysis, selling research. And we made a big call this January saying that there's a danger of a U.S. recession and a global recession in 2025. And we can go into that and how we were wrong in 23 and 24. We made a call that a recession was coming then, but then we figured out why we were wrong and how it's inevitable over the next 12 to 18 months.
What made you make the prediction initially in 23, 24 that a recession was pending? Was there something specific with the American economy? Was it something that Biden was doing? What was the trigger for you to make that assessment?
Well, we have economic early cycle indicators and a model that predicts recessions, and the model was predicting a recession, and it did not occur. We started to see a bounce in economic activity in October of 23, and the indicators got back up to from recessionary territory to zero, which is not expansion, but the momentum was going the other way. So the economic model failed for the first time in the history of our modeling, 20 years history. So we asked ourselves, or have the fundamentals of economic analysis changed, or is there something different going on? And what we realized was when you introduce a new economic variable into a country like the U.S., which is 10 to 20 million illegal immigrants that were actually funded by the government, it was an illegal operation, and it had a huge impact on the economy for a very short period of time. And this is going on in other countries as well, massive immigration. And people don't really understand the economic impact of that. There is money spent to get the people from the other countries to your country. Then there is money spent, it's usually washed through the NGO system. That is given, the NGOs get the money from the government, so it's plausible deniability. And the employees of the NGOs make money that gets injected into the economy. Then there's shelter and food and housing for these illegal immigrants while they may find work or may not find work. And that has a very stimulative effect into the economy. It's a multiplier effect. When you give someone that really hasn't had any money for the first time, they immediately spend it. So it's a short-term sugar juice high, but it's done with deficit spending, massive debt borrowing. So while it makes the economy look good in the short term, long term, it's a disaster, and societally, it creates tension and social ills, and this is why we're seeing the rise of populism across Europe and the U.S.
What I think this sums up how I actually learnt about yourself in quite a lot of detail is that I follow you on social media. I've seen read about your book and all this sort of stuff. But what I found really profound and really strong is the way you've been able to show the economic impact of illegal immigration, because it's something that is very rarely talked about in the UK and maybe just generally in the West. The economic impact it has. You hear a lot of people, even myself, talk about the moral problem with that. The how unfair it is on legal migrants, how unfair that the way the system is built. But very few people I've heard are able to put it as clearly as yourself on the economic impact of illegal migration. Why is it that so few people are talking about this, the economic burden? Because, like I said, it just doesn't seem to be something that's a popular thing to talk about, or just a normal, rational conversation thing to talk about.
Yeah, well, these governments. Well, I'll use the U.S. as an example. So there's laws on the books about how to get into the country legally. So in the U.S., before the huge influx of illegal aliens under the Biden administration, we had net legal migration of about 1 million a year in the U.S. So then you flood the zone with 10 to 20 million. It creates a lot of economic activity. Now the question is, and that's why that's part of the reason we had huge, massive deficit spending in the U.S. Our deficit to GDP was running at 8% in 23 and 24. Just to give you an idea what that kind of deficit spending is, that's the kind of deficit spending we did during the Great Financial Crisis. So what was the crisis? The crisis was we were spending money to bring people into the country to, I think, stimulate economic growth and also bring in a new voting bloc that would vote for the Democrats. So, and it's illegal as of the current laws. So, it was a very in-depth logistical operation. You just don't walk from Central America to the Mexican border and then, or through the Darien Gap into Mexico, then get into the interior of the country, then get transported to different cities across the nation without assistance. And that assistance creates a lot of economic activity. So, conservatively, what was the cost of this operation? Well, in back of the envelope math, again, we don't have all the details, but this is, I think, a reasonable assumption. The all-in cost to get someone from Central America into a city somewhere in the U.S. and set them up with shelter and food, you could easily say that all-in cost, including what the NGO employees got, was $50,000 to $100,000 per illegal immigrant for the whole
Wow.
operation. You multiply that by 10 to 20 million, that's one to 2 trillion in US dollars. And, we were running $2 trillion deficits the last, 2 years of the Biden administration. And I think this is going on in Australia, it's going on in Europe. And, the money masters and the governments have a problem. We have massive global debt. And there's two ways you can get rid of the global debt. You can inflate your way out of it, or you can default. They've chosen to inflate the way out of it, and a massive influx of illegal immigrants is massively inflationary. It puts a lot of pressure on rents and shelter, which is the biggest component of our CPI. Our CPI, 45% of our CPI is shelter. So, look, what I'm not in the room. Was this a plan to, inflate away the debt, or was it just a decision by the Biden administration to get in people that would vote for them? Either way, it short-term juiced the U.S. economy, because the real economy was, for the middle class of America, was at recessionary levels. Real wage growth was at -2%. And every time we've had that, we've had a change in administration. Ronald Reagan was swept into office in 1980 because real wages were minus 2%. Bill Clinton won in 92, same phenomenon. And before the Trump administration got in, Donald Trump had a minus 2% real wage growth. So I kind of knew he was going to get elected unless they stole it. They didn't steal it. It was too big of a margin. So here we are in 2025 with Donald Trump in office, and what he's done already is stop the flow of illegals into the U.S. So this is the second derivative thing. So that just by stopping the flow, the prior economic activity of bringing in illegal aliens is going to go away, and I think we're going to see asset prices and financial markets wobble. We're going to get inflation starting to go down. I put out a post yesterday on X. I was talking to my partner. The way we look at inflation, we're going to put out a big inflation report that we're going to sell. But we think CPI, headline CPI in the US will be sub 2% sometime in the next 6 to 12 months. This will create a brief deflationary scare. Stock markets and credit markets will wobble as economic activity slows. And we have a housing crisis right before us. There's a cycle known as the 18-year housing cycle. The last housing peak was in 2007. You go forward 18 years, here we are. It's just natural ebb and flow of cycles that you just can't get around. We're starting to see weakness in the housing market in the US. Globally, real home prices have been coming down in Europe and China. So this is going to become a global issue, and the stopping of the flow of illegal immigrants in the US is going to kick it off. Now, you can say, oh, well, we have to save the economy, so let's let these people come in. But societally, you're tearing apart your country, and there's a lot of problems. People don't understand demographics is destiny. My partner Carlos Alegre wrote a book in 2021. Well, it was a revised edition to his book because COVID hit. It's called Economic Cycles, Debt, and Demographics. And demographics are destiny. When you have an aging population, you have a debt problem. You have a generational kind of battle between the older people who want the governments to continue to keep inflation low and subsidize them, and then you have the young people who can't buy homes. So I guess the money masters decided illegal immigration was going to be a way to take care of this problem. The problem is it's societally it's a disaster, and I think if you look at demographics, if I was a central planner in Europe or the US, looking ahead 10, 20 years, I would see the math not working favorably. And so these are why you've seen these massive immigration ploys in Europe, and then it really kicked off in the US under Biden. But you guys in Europe have had this problem for years, and it's a way to temporarily inflate away the debt.
It's definitely been very clear in especially in the UK, in particular, I think across Europe, about how they've used mass migration to essentially pump up the economy. We know for a fact that that's not the real state of affairs. We know for one of the reasons why even we had previous conservative leadership, or so-called conservative leadership, and at no point were the numbers remotely reduced, even though they kept promising that they would cut down numbers. And I think it became quite almost an open secret that they don't actually want to decrease the numbers because economically it's more, in the short term anyway, more beneficial. But what I think you've really raised an interesting point, and I think it's something that maybe is talked a bit more about in the States, but less in Europe at the moment, is the illegal migration aspect, because that's still something in Europe, especially in the UK, that is a very if you like, a taboo thing to talk about, in terms of the idea that the current Labour government, the previous Conservative governments across Europe, are using illegal migration to boost the economy in terms of short term. It's something that would be very rarely talked about, even though the argument completely stands and makes sense. I want to go back to two things here. Why was Biden almost allowed to do this? And if you like, why was he able, his administration, to essentially get away with this? And why do you think no one in Europe is really talking in detail like you are, in terms of the implications of mass illegal immigration on the long-term economic impact of it?
Well, in the U.S., there was a lot of speculation. I happen to believe the 2020 election was stolen. And so Biden, it's come out that he really wasn't in charge of his mental faculties. So you had a government where we didn't know who was running the show. We still don't know who was actually pulling the levers of power
Yeah.
in the U.S. for 4 years. So, you know, so the illegal immigration happened behind the scenes. It was washed through the NGO system. So you'd have to again. I wasn't in the room. This is all speculation on my part. So this was a somewhat of a planned operation to keep the U.S. economy afloat and get Biden reelected so they can continue their policies. Look, if look, Trump got in there, and within a week, the flow at the border stopped in Europe. If your leaders were serious about stopping illegal immigration, they could do it overnight. Overnight. The fact that they're not is prima facie evidence that it's a plan, and the plan is to keep this Ponzi scheme global financial system afloat as long as they can. And when you massively import illegal immigrants, they're not as educated as the resident Western populations. They're on the dole for the most part. Some of them may find jobs. Some of them may be good people that want to contribute to society. A lot of them just receive goodies, and they're compliable and they're more easily controlled. So you got to remember, every human being is a unit of economic activity, and demographics drive a lot of the growth in different countries. And let's look at China. China had huge economic growth because of the deals they struck when they entered the World Trade Organization, and they built a ton of infrastructure, and they had a growing population that peaked demographically in 2020. China is now in a demographic decline, and if you look at what's happened to China's economy, it's in trouble. They are in a deflationary death spiral. Their yields keep creeping lower, which is a sign of deflation, and they have a problem on their hands. They have and now with the tariff trade wars, they're even more in trouble. So and the problem with these demographic issues is country leaders tend not to want to take responsibility for anything. So geopolitically, this is very unstable. And China's biggest fear is their own population because they're a tyrannical government. And if enough people become unemployed, if enough people are sitting idle, that could foment a revolution. So China is probably going to, at some point, need a scapegoat for all this, and it'll be us or Europe. And there'll be some sort of distraction geopolitically, like a war, war with Taiwan, what have you. So, unfortunately, the monetary system we have, and just the way the demographics ebb and flow, it creates conflict every 3 or 4 generations. And here we are, and we got a lot of problems.
I mean, the going back to the UK in terms of the demographic change, some of I think that the UK is witnessing definitely the social impact of that. There's something that Elon Musk was amazing in terms of highlighting about the grooming gang scandal in the UK and some of the impacts of when you import a mass number of migrants in illegally in the way that the UK has done. You can see the social impact, but it's really interesting how I think very few people are making the economic link. I definitely want to touch on the tariffs on Trump's tariffs because I think it's something that's got very poor coverage in Europe. We've only really heard one side and only one bit on it. But I want to go back to the situation now in America with what Trump is doing in terms of the how he's almost overnight, as you say, stopped the amount of illegal migrants coming into America and what that means going forward in terms of the economy. You said some more, bleak things about the American economy in the short term, but do you think it's almost something that needs to happen? What some of what's going to happen to the American economy, if you like, in the next 6 months is something that almost like a correction, if you like. Do you think it's something that is a necessary thing to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, there's been a ton of malinvestment. We have an AI bubble. that reminds me of the dot-com bubble. A lot of spending on infrastructure, but there's no revenue model on the other side. No one's monetizing AI. So there's a tremendous amount of investment. And if you go back to the dot-com days, there was a tremendous amount of investment in fiber optic cable. There were a bunch of companies that were floated with junk bonds on speculation and hype. They ordered a lot of equipment. Cisco and Qualcomm and all those guys made a ton of money, and Nortel, Lucent. And then the credit markets finally figured out at some point there was no revenue, and that gravy train stopped. We're starting to see that in the AI bubble. We're seeing Microsoft and Amazon indicate that they're going to slow their CapEx spend because, quite frankly, there's no return on investment. And that, look, I think AI right now is nothing more than a large language model. It's not, general AI, or it's not actually thinking for itself. It's just regurgitating a lot of great data very fast. But there's no way to make money yet. And so this is what reminds me of the dot-com boom and bust. We're going to see that. And then, the great AI companies that will emerge, I don't even know who they are yet. They'll come out of the rubble, or there'll be new ones. So we have that bubble bursting, and we also have a housing problem in the US. And the housing was already on shaky ground. The only thing keeping it afloat was the illegal alien pressure on rents, because, even though they don't buy homes outright, if the rental market is tight, speculators in homes will do fine until that supply goes away. And new tenant rents are already coming down in the U.S. They continue to drift lower, which is a leading indicator of home prices. So the U.S. economy is going to go into a nice deep recession. We're not calling that it's going to go systemic. And when I say systemic, that means there's going to be banking failures and all that. We hope there isn't. If there are, we'll call it. But it's actually necessary, because middle-class America, and I'm sure in the UK, homes are out of the reach of the average person. And a correction would be great for the middle class. And stock prices coming down would be great for the younger generation, because they can enter the market at good valuations. The valuations that peaked in February of 2025 in the U.S. stock market were, at bubble-like levels we saw in the dot-com era. And if you project, bubbles always burst, and if you projected 10-year forward returns at the current dividend yield on the S&P 500, it was a disaster. So the cycles are the cycles. They've been extending and pretending for a long time, and this is where we are. And I think while it'll be uncomfortable for very rich people that are over levered, the average person's going to be fine. Their biggest risk is losing their job. So my advice to middle class people in the UK and Europe and the US is to be as valuable to your employer as possible now. So when the risks come, you'll be fine, and hunker down. And Trump, what he's attempting to do, and again, we don't know whether he can do it, is to restructure the U.S. economy from an economy that only benefits the rich to that which benefits the middle class. That's why he's trying to bring back manufacturing to the U.S. That's a long-term plan. It's not going to happen overnight, so there's going to be pain before those effects can happen. Let's talk about the tariffs for a second. When the tariffs first hit, there was a lot of gnashing of teeth, a lot of emotions. We're very analytical, and whether you hate Trump or love Trump, it doesn't matter. You got to look at what is. So what was when he put out those trade tariffs initially? People speculated the calculations were ludicrous, and it was idiocy, and there was no plan. Well, the plan was this: he wanted to get people to the table, and that's why he just put these arbitrary tariffs on every country. And then he paused them for 90 days. So the tariffs and as it turned out, it looks like he's isolating Europe and Russia, China. And the idea is to not only, and if you read the executive order, which many people didn't do, they cited persistent and large deficits, persistent and consistent large U.S. deficits structurally. So they're going to tackle that. And they also talked about not only the tariffs, the actual tariffs, but the non-tariff barriers, which are huge, and they involve delays, hidden fees, uh, things like that they're going to tackle. So the idea was to get people to the table. The only problem with tariffs is people think that they're inflationary. They're actually deflationary because they affect the especially for goods with elasticity. People aren't stupid. So if a product from China goes up 100%, uh, people are going to find different products that are like that product and buy them. And what's going to happen is the price hikes are going to create a quantity demand percent drop that is higher than the price hikes, which creates lower revenue. So the revenues of these companies on a microeconomic basis are going to go lower. So net, it's deflationary. Overall, there'll be certain items that go up, there'll be others that go down, but net, it destroys demand, which eventually will cause deflationary pressures, which will feed back into the economy, like people losing jobs, credit starting to get tight, and you can already see what's going on with oil. Oil and commodities are not happy right now. There's been a nice little huge rally in the U.S. stock market since the Liberation Day. That rally has not been confirmed by commodities. In fact, they're going the other way. Oil's going lower. Oil is an indicator of global demand, which is dropping fast. So we got problems ahead. It'll be terrifying to rich, over-leveraged people, but to the average person, it's not. I mean, I was talking to someone yesterday, and they said, I told them a recession's coming. They believe me, and she said, "What can I do?" And I go, "Well, what assets do you have?" She's like, "Really, not any." I go, "Then you have nothing to worry about." I mean, if you don't own a bunch of stocks, you don't need to worry about it. Just keep your job. And that made her feel better. I'm like, it's not the end of the recessions happen, and
Yeah.
they're good sometimes. And the problem is we've delayed this one for so long. We should have had it in 23, 24. The Biden administration decided to prop it up by bringing in 10 to 20 million people, and the societal costs are enormous here in the U.S. And that's what's one of the major reasons Trump was elected and brought in.
There's so many things I want to touch up on what you mentioned over there. I want to start with the bubble bursting right now. Do you think you said this is cyclical and everyone, I'm sure most people understand that, agree. Do you think this one's a bit different in the fact that it seems as if Trump is almost reshaping the economy, and do you think it's almost, I think for a long time we've seen the benefits of globalization, but we're seeing some of the downsides. A lot of people, especially middle class Americans, being middle class people in Europe as well, are seeing the not so good side of some of the globalization, because it feels as if Trump is almost reshaping the economy in a way that maybe benefits wider America. And then I want to ask, carry on the question with what you said about how there should have been a recession earlier, because this is something in the UK that was talked about during COVID. So during COVID, the first year of COVID, our UK government put on a lot of heavy measures to essentially keep people in jobs, keep businesses going. And one of the things that they did in the first year of COVID was it was the lowest year of businesses going bust, so the least amount of businesses going bust in over like 30 years. And I remember speaking to economists and some of my friends who were all saying this is absolutely terrible because companies need to go bust. People need to go. A bad company staying in, not going bust sooner is worse off. It should happen sooner. Do you think this is similar in the sense of, had there been an earlier recession, we would be in a better position than we are now? And then also, as I said, the first question: do you see this bubble bursting as an opportunity now for America and maybe the West to really reshape their economy?
Yes, but the economic pain will obviously be blamed on the Trump administration. There's no way around that. But when you restructure economies from, the U.S. has become a financialized economy. Those closest to the printing press have benefited the most, meaning CEOs who get stock options, private equity people, hedge fund managers, bankers, people in real estate. And people who actually, work for a living have seen their earnings and wages decline. Uh, this is a societal question. Globalization worked until it didn't. It benefited the very rich, and it makes sense because if you're going to export a lot of your jobs to lower labor, where they don't have, like, let's call it essentially slave labor, which is what happened over the last 20 years, you're going to create a host of ills in society. And then my speculation is the global economy was about to collapse in 2019, and then miraculously COVID came along to save it. And how did it save it? The Federal Reserve printed the most amount of money, and the government of the U.S. spent the most amount of money it had ever spent to basically give money to businesses and individuals. That caused inflation. Inflation is a monetary phenomenon, and that was the first time really we've had inflation since, massive inflation since the great financial crisis. And I think that was done on purpose to reinflate away the debt. And but it creates a lot of malinvestment and disincentives in the economy. So there were a lot of zombie companies supported, uh, and bankruptcies are a good thing because the people who purchase the bankrupt companies get to buy them at very low valuations and can create
Yep.
jobs and capital. So this AI bubble bursting is going to be a good thing eventually for those in AI who can survive, because they'll be able to get computing power for pennies on the dollar. Because right now an NVIDIA GPU costs $40,000. That's ridiculous. So just like in the dot-com boom, look at it's like building the railroads, laying fiber optic cables, like building a railroad system. We had a bubble in railroads too in the 1800s that burst. But the good news is there was a lot of people that built the infrastructure. They overcapitalized it. They got wiped out. But then we had railroads, and then economic activity took off after that. Same thing with the dot. We built all these fiber optic cables. We overinvested. It went bust. But then people were able to pick up that fiber optic cable with pennies on the dollar. And then we had the Web 2.0 companies, cheap. That's why we have all these streaming services and smartphones. So there is a benefit to bubbles after they burst. The people who invest in the bubble part, the overinvestment, they lose their shirts. And there is a short-term economic downturn, but long-term, it's a good thing. So as pessimistic as I sound, long-term, I'm optimistic, but we have to go through pain first, and it's coming. It's already started. I mean, the AI bubble burst in February. Then we got the tariffs. The tariffs, I think, are mostly noise. There's structural issues in the U.S. economy that can't be avoided. And, Trump would be, if Trump stopped caring about the border and didn't deport anybody, I would say then the policies have gone back to the old policies, and Trump has betrayed his base. Haven't seen that yet, so the recession's coming. So I would change my tune on a recession if they really ramped government spending and continued the importation of illegals. Now, short term, that juices the economy. Long term, it's a disaster because these individuals are not productive. We estimated that only about 2 million of the 10 to 20 that got into the U.S. found jobs. That means the rest are just sitting around collecting checks. And that can't go on forever.
Why is it, again, it's maybe an early question. So why is it that people are not looking at the economic impact of illegal migrations in the US? Because you sound so clearly. I think most people would listen to this will 100% or find it very hard to have a logical argument with what you've said. So why is it that it's taken Trump to do this? Why did Biden? Why did Obama? Why has it taken so long for everyone to understand the economic impact? Is it just because they'll focus on their short terms, they'll just focus on that kind of short-term bubble for selfish reasons? Is it because Trump's actually forward thinking a long-term plan, really cares about America? Why? What is the rationale between a leader almost deliberately ignoring the clearly something that's going to be harmful for his country in the long term?
Well, I think a lot of economists and people in the elite seats that aren't part of the plan look at the headline numbers, and they look at GDP, they look at payroll numbers, and that's how they measure the success of the economy. without realizing that the average person is struggling mightily. So on paper, things look good, but it's not good. And the U.S. really didn't join the illegal immigration game until Biden. So I probably would be guilty of someone that didn't understand the economic implications of what was going on in Europe, because you guys have been dealing with this for a lot longer than we have. Then once we got our call wrong, we had to figure out why we got it wrong, and then we're like, aha! When you bring 10 to 20 million people into a population, we were like at 330, now we're at 350 in the U.S., and you do that in a very short period of time, and you have massive government support of that legal immigration. That was the key. It's a new economic variable. So we kind of discovered it because we were wrong on our call. So it's really something I think that people are just starting to understand. I'd say we were probably the first to understand it. I think others will follow suit. Dr. Lacey Hunt, another economist in the U.S., he put out a newsletter talking about 5 forces impacting the U.S. economy. Number 5 was illegal immigration. So other people are starting to recognize this issue. And you got to understand, even though I knew that illegal immigration was going on, the U.S. government was hiding, and the U.S. media was not reporting on what was going on at the border. So this wasn't, even those of us who are good analysts didn't really understand the implications or the magnitude of what was going on until 2024.
Has this had any implications on yourself or the businesses you're involved in terms of when you've spoken about illegal migration? Just to put it in context, in the UK, if you said what you're saying now, you would probably lose quite a lot of credibility within your businesses and within your enterprises. There'd be a lot of people almost trying to dismiss anything your future projections. Since you've started talking about illegal migration, has that had any impact on some of the stuff that your economic predictions and the way you're valued by people in your circles?
Honestly, I think the timing with our call is right, because a lot of people are understanding that the world and the media and there's more and more people who are open-minded to, rational discussions, not political discussions. And so look, when we say that it impacted the economy, we're just analyzing that it happened. We're not
Right.
saying is it good. I mean, obviously there's societal impacts, and people voted against it, but we're trying to understand what drove the economy. And then, I'm in the job of predicting economic activity. Trump is going to remove what kept the economy afloat. So people need to understand that, and so it's being met with I think not hatred or volatility, and people are like, oh, that makes sense. And I think if I was a UK economist living in London and tried to float this idea 3 years ago, I think people would laugh at me, because there was there's this group think, and political correctness. In the U.S., we're lucky that we have a lot of free thinkers, and the censorship isn't as bad here.
Right.
And so, I'm able to say what I can say, and I'm not getting a lot of pushback. And I suspect, as we roll through time, a lot of other economists will, incorporate this concept into their ideas.
What happens next now with Trump's tariffs? So what are the next stages for America? Because again, like I say, the UK coverage on this is really, really poor. It seems like a lot of people in the UK, especially some of the journalists, they just don't understand negotiations, and I don't think they ever really have understood just basic negotiations. But in particular, now what happens at this Trump with the tariff negotiations? What do you envisage Trump doing next, and what implications will that have? That first for the US and then for the rest of the world.
So let's talk about the idea. There's introduced the word exogenous and endogenous. COVID was an exogenous event. I mean, we shut down the economies ourselves, and then we reopened them. So tariffs are exogenous, meaning Trump said there's tariffs. What people don't understand is, okay, so there's tariffs. How long are they going to last? Is it a negotiation tool? So this is a dynamic situation which can change overnight, and we've seen that already. People have come to the table. So I suspect over the course of the next 6 months, there'll be less fear of the tariffs and more getting down to negotiations. The endogenous structural issues of the economy that Trump and nobody can really stop unless they want to, import, millions of people illegally, is coming to the Europe and the U.S. globally, and that's endogenous. It's cyclical. It's structural. So the tariffs, while there's a lot of angst about them, I'm less fearful because if Trump can just remove them at his whim. So it's yes, it caused the stock markets to fluctuate. Yes, it caused a lot of consternation, but we were already starting to roll over in the economy. The bubble already burst in February. The AI bubble has already burst. There's indications that spending in that sector is going to be on the margin lower over time. So I think the tariffs, while they get a lot of people excited and talk about them, you got to remember Trump can, with the can turn on the light switch and turn off the light switch. So he is if he's not going to do something that's going to wreck the economy for too long. So this is more of a negotiation ploy, and people have to understand. We put out a report on January 9th, which is available for sale at our website, financetechnologies.com, spelled with a PH. We had a whole section about trade wars. And our analysis is basically, as the consumer of last resort for the manufacturers of the world, we have a lot of leverage and negotiating power. They don't. So that the leverage resides with the person who's buying, not the person who's selling.
So you think this is like so the Trump tariffs, they're here to say that they can change. What do you think in terms of going forward, the next big US, if you like, the where do you see the change in economy? You kind of mentioned it earlier, more of an emphasis on manufacturing. Do you see that happening swiftly? Is that already happening in America? Are we seeing almost a reshaping of the economy in America?
Well, so manufacturing has already been and has PMI, which is a measurement of manufacturing activity, has been in recessionary levels for flirting with the recessionary levels for over 2 years. There's overcapacity in manufacturing. We talk about that in our report. So there's a glut of manufacturing capacity globally. So Trump's plan to bring manufacturing to the U.S., while a good idea, is also problematic because we already have too much capacity globally. So that's why I think it might take longer. But what we're going to see, we think, over the next 12 months is you're going to start to see hard data get worse, and the hard data is payroll numbers, GDP numbers. Um, Soft data is consumer confidence, which is already in the tank. The stock market will continue. You'll see earnings on, large corporations start to report misses in their earnings, and then we'll start to see layoffs. So that we think that's all coming. Interest rates are still too high. Money is tight. The Fed is behind the 8 ball. The Fed's likely not to lower this upcoming FOMC meeting, primarily because the payroll number that came out in the U.S. on Friday was, a beat on the headline number. But if you looked at the birth death rate model, that's always problematic, and they revised down the prior 2 months. So I think we're going to see payroll numbers and GDP numbers come in weaker. We're going to see we're already starting to see credit tighten in the U.S. Consumer auto loans or approvals are going lower, so that means credit's tightening. So these feedback loops have already been set off, and they're going to accelerate into the summer.
I think this leads quite nicely into my next question in terms of with the Trump administration and the state of the US economy. So I think a lot of people in Britain are looking at what is happening in America. We obviously have at the moment a really big movement in Nigel Farage's group, Reform, who are really rising and more of a sort of a populist change. And as you rightly say, it's happening across Europe. What are some of your concerns, if you like? You talked about the short-term implications of potentially people losing their jobs. Um, how bad do you think it can get essentially for America and the world? And then secondly, um, what some of the stuff you've said about the fixes of the economy of the US seem quite long term. Do you think these can happen, these changes under the Trump years, if you like, or will this have to be continued by, let's say, JD Vance or somebody else from the Republican Party? And do you think Americans could stomach that, if you like it, that this is a long-term plan that necessarily may not be completed under the Trump years, or do you think within the Trump years this should be aligned?
In a perfect world, so he's going to cut taxes, he's going to deregulate, he's going to try to bring manufacturing back. Manufacturing uh, is that's not going to happen overnight. You have to, you need to get the capital to invest. You need to break ground. You need to, tool up plants, build plants, tool them up, hire people. So that's longer term. But what can really juice the economy is deregulation. There's a lot of unnecessary regulatory issues in the U.S. and the U.K. and Europe. I mean, the European Union is nothing more than you know bureaucrats interfering in commerce, and you know it, I know it. It's a joke. And you deregulate, get rid of a lot of the government paperwork. That would hugely accelerate the velocity of money and get things going. So ideally, we have a deep recession like Ronald Reagan did in 81 and 82. He restructured the economy, and then in his last 2 years, the economy started to take off. Ideally, that's what happens to Trump. Sometime by the end of 26, after the pain, we start to come out of it. Now, that that's the best case. Worst case is what you said. Maybe it has to get carried out under JD Vance. Then that calls into the problem. Well, if the economy is really bad in 2024, 2028, unfortunately, that's going to be a tough sell to the average American, because unfortunately, most people don't understand these complex issues. I wish the Trump administration would do a better job of communicating what's going on, what they were, what kind of economy they were handed, and how the Biden administration really accelerated government spending in the last 3 months of his term to hand Trump a hand grenade. But look, I'm not in the administration. I'm just a guy that does economic research and does some podcasts. So it is what it is.
Well, so again, like let's just say the next these tariffs have the positive impact. What if we're saying ideal scenario? What you'd like to see in America in the next few years, and with what Trump's doing, what kind of America can Americans expect to see in the world to see should Trump's plan and should everything go to plan? What kind of America will let's say he does exactly what he intends to do by the end of his term? What kind of America does that look like?
Well, so Americans are very creative and entrepreneurial. I would expect to see a lot of new small business creation. I would expect to see lots of new companies after the AI bubble bursts. I'm sure we'll become the AI leaders once compute pricing comes down. We're going to see a middle class restored, which when you bring a plant to America and you put a plant, it's not just the people who get hired to work in the plant. It's all the economic activity that is the multiplier effect around that plant. It creates a town, it creates ancillary services, it boosts real estate prices, it creates service industries around that. So I expect middle class Americans to have more job opportunities. If this all happens, of course, more job opportunities, real wage growth versus inflation, and the ability to hopefully buy a home after home prices come down. So it should be better days ahead, but we got a lot of problems before then. I mean, honestly, we have basically a tech AI bubble bursting at the same time as a housing crisis. So we had a tech bubble bursting in 2000. We had a housing bubble bursting in 2007. Now we have both of them bursting at the same time. So that's going to be painful. and this is going to happen globally. I mean, home prices are in real terms are already rolling over in Europe. And we put that's in our report. We analyze the global real estate market and the U.S. real estate market, and they're all conspiring to cause economic activity to slow. Because in the U.S., 20% of our 80% of our GDP is consumption, and 20% of that is related to housing and housing services. So that, generally speaking, the U.S. consumer has been muddling along. If we have a housing problem, that's really going to hit the consumption of the U.S. economy, which is a big part of our GDP. So that's what we see.
In context, when you say recession, a lot of people on this podcast, especially in UK, will be thinking of 2008 financial crisis, the impact. If we're comparing what you're predicting in comparison to that, how much, what are we talking about in terms of the average everyday person impact if we're comparing
Well, the
to now?
systemic crisis is what we want to avoid. The great financial crisis, the lights almost went out. I mean, it was you do not want to see massive banking failures. You don't want to see stock prices declining more than 50%. In a typical recession, that involves housing, we should see, and a tech bubble, we should see stock prices decline 50% from the high in February to the final low. If we get an 80% decline, that's Great Depression problems, and that would be systemic. So we're not calling for that. We're calling for something, we'd like it to be a blend between the Great Financial Crisis and the dot-com bubble. So,
Yeah.
where stock prices, in the dot-com bubble, it took 2 years for stocks to go down 50%. And slow is better than fast, because when it's fast, there's margin calls, credit events. So I'd like to see this unfold slowly and, asset prices decline, but manageable. If it happens too fast, that's when we have problems.
A
And
lot of
again,
people.
I can't predict that. I'm hoping it's not that. And in real time, if it looks like it's going systemic, we'll put out a report on that and say, Katie barred the door, things are different.
There's going to be a lot of people listening to this and agreeing with a lot of what you said. There'll be some people saying, um, "Why is this recession necessary? Like, is there anything we can do to stop it? And why is it essentially a bad thing, if you like, to try and stop this pending recession happening?"
You may look. You can try to stop it, and what does trying to stop it mean? Well, since the marginal contributor to economies, the last, I'd say, since the Great Financial Crisis and since COVID, have been government spending. So you could stop it by accelerating government spending even more than we have done, but you're just kicking the can down the road. You're going to kick up inflation. You're going to have social unrest. So it's a disaster. So yes, they could stop it if they wanted to, but it's not a good idea to try.
Okay, that's clear. I think yeah. I mean, I think for a lot of people, I think they will be interested to hear this point of this perspective. I think it's quite clear in Europe that we're suffering many of the similar things that are going on in the States. I think with the illegal migration, I think that's something that maybe we're really seeing the social impacts maybe a bit more than America in terms of how it's affecting, if you like, everyday life in terms of the structures, the fabrics of the countries and
Yeah,
society.
well, I see a two-tier society. You have the natives who get charged with crimes, and the illegals get a pass. That's creating a lot of problems. Natives can't say things. Illegals can say whatever they want. So you have a two-tier justice system, which is tearing apart the fabric of Europe and the UK. And it's obvious to anybody with a brain.
I think with I think the UK is just at the moment, similar of Europe. I think the UK had more arrests than Russia on social media. The way that the current the UK government is going is very scary, as is Europe. And I think the interesting thing, even before we talk about illegal migration and the impact it's had on the economy, even on legal immigrants into the country, from the 60s and 70s, you're looking around 10, 20,000. We are now talking hundreds and hundreds of thousands on a yearly basis, and it's just increasing more and more. And add on top of that the illegal situation, it's absolutely a really crazy world what's going on there. Socially, I think we're seeing it's being talked a lot more, which is a good thing in some ways. The exposure, Elon's done a good job of this, and other people have, of really exposing the two-tier system socially. But I think what a lot of people will learn from this podcast is also there is a serious economic impact into what's happening in the UK, which has really been hidden. As I think you mentioned a bit earlier, a lot of people would be scared to have these kind of conversation. Even the economists who know that this is happening for a fact, they'd be very, very scared. Maybe because of also the two-tier system, they'd be even more scared to make such comments about that. So it's something that's really being not talked about. The social stuff's being talked about a lot more in the United Kingdom as opposed to the economic side. What about in America? Are you talking as much about the social impact of when you import like a mass number of people like this?
No, absolutely, absolutely. I talk about why that's why Trump was elected to stop this societal impact. But the problem is because it was the marginal contributor to the economy, it's the stopping of it is going to create some pain. And look, at the base of what I do as a financial analyst is I try to get to the truth so that I can help my clients not lose money. So, we figured out this new economic variable. We call it the elephant in the room, illegal immigration, and how much it impacted the economy. The U.S. government was running an illegal operation, so obviously, they don't want people to know this, so the media doesn't talk about it. And my job is to make sure people don't lose money. So I'm just trying to tell the truth as I see it. And I think on the margin, people appreciate it because money seems to clarify things. And and if people want to know why their stock portfolios are going down, it's because you voted for this. And yes, it short. And so if you can, Warren Buffett is mostly cash because I think he knows what's coming as well. So you can help people avoid pain, understand that for the good of the country and the globe, long term it's a good thing. Short term financial pain, who cares? I mean, it was coming. It was coming. If they kicked the can down the road, it eventually was going to come, but it would be even worse than what we see now.
Great. I mean, it's been amazing to listen to you, Edward. I've got so many more questions. I'm just conscious of I've taken up quite a lot of your time already. I have like a closing tradition on this show where I ask the guests what is an unpopular opinion that you have that you think should be popular. So it can be anything that we've discussed in this show. It can be something completely trivial, something completely unrelated. But yeah, an unpopular opinion that you have that you think should be popular.
Well, I'll talk about an unpopular opinion in regards to those who support the Trump administration. Look, I am not someone that believes in idol worship. Trump is better than Kamala Harris. I agree with a lot of what he's doing, but one thing that I think is an unpopular opinion that needs to be spoken more about in the MAGA community is why has the COVID and the mRNA shots not been pulled from the market? That seems to be another elephant in the room, and that is starting to bother me, and I'll become more vocal about that over time. I think that's going to become, I probably will become at odds with the MAGA folks at some point because I'm going to start to get loud about it. But that's an unpopular opinion that should be a popular opinion because we've never seen a vaccine that is this bad that's still on the market after so much death and injury and disability. And the numbers are there. I don't have to prove it anymore. We're not even doing any more research on the subject because we think the common man is starting to realize there's something wrong with that. But we have officialdom not really taking any responsibility for that yet.
What about the America Healthy Again movement? Are they not addressing this? Are they not talking about this?
Nope, they don't touch the mRNA issue. It's everything else but.
Wow. I mean, I'd love to talk to you about that. Maybe we'll do that another time because it's something that we're talking a lot about in the UK now, the impacts of the jab and some of the stuff that happened in during those 4 years and how there's a real, one of the things reforms having this massive movement is maybe the two major parties, Labours and Conservatives, refusing to accept some of the mistakes they made during that pandemic.
Well, you also have a system known as the PIP system, the Personal Independence Payment System, disabilities in the UK. You have great data there. We showed that numbers for all sorts of different disability conditions went off the rails starting in 2021. And unless there's a come to Jesus moment in the UK, that system's going to go bankrupt. And they're already talking about cuts, but they're not talking about why they're going to make the cuts. They're making the cuts because the system's being overloaded with injuries and disabilities from the COVID jab.
Is this talked about a lot in America right now, the implications of the COVID jab? Because it is definitely something that's picking up in the UK. Is this something that people are talking about?
It has been, but not enough. In the U.S., we had about 30 million disabled people. This is a survey done by our Bureau of Labor Statistics, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it's a survey, so it's not perfect, but it's monthly data. It's a question, so it's not tied to claims. We had about 30 million people in the U.S. that were, identifying as or being labeled as disabled. There's 6 questions that are asked. If you say yes to one, you go on the roll. It's just a survey, not tied to money or claim. Around February of 2021, disabilities in the U.S. took off. Now they're almost 35 million. So over a 5-year period, we jumped a huge amount. Same numbers in the UK. It's a disaster.
Well, we'll have to get you on another time and discuss that in further detail. It's been amazing talking to you, Edward, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.